or hi. Venezuela, the official name, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, the state in the north of South America. It is washed by the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean in the north, borders on Guyana in the east, Brazil in the south and Colombia in the west. According to the most widespread version, in 1499 the Spanish expedition led by Alonso de Ojeda visited the Venezuelan coast, where it found in the Gulf to the west of the peninsula of Paraguay the Indian settlement located on piles. Indian huts on piles reminded the Italian navigator Florentine Amerigo Vespucci the city in the Venetian lagoon, therefore he called the Gulf Venezuela. Small Venice. On modern Russian language maps it is the Gulf of Venezuela. Later the name Venezuela was distributed to all southern coast of the Caribbean Sea to the Delta of Orinoco inclusive, and in 1830 the name Venezuela was accepted by the independent republic allocated from structure of Great Colombia. The climate of Venezuela is defined by alternation of damp equatorial air masses at calm weather in the summer and dry trade winds in the winter. Temperatures change little within a year and depend generally on area height. Coastal areas differ in the exhausting heat and high humidity of air. On heights of temperature is lower and conditions are more comfortable for dwelling of the person. For this reason all large cities are located at the height from 600 to 1850 meters above sea level. Higher than 1800 m climate are much more cool and is close to climate of mid-latitudes. At the heights more than 1300 m it is so cold that agriculture is almost impossible, and the main type of agricultural activity is sheep breeding. More than 3/4 of the area of the country are characterized by a rainy season which proceeds from May to November. The amount of precipitation varies from 280 mm on the Caribbean coast up to 2000 mm more at the southernmost tip of Lake Maracaibo and on Navitrini slopes of mountains and Guiana Highlands. The dry season proceeds from December to April. The territory of Venezuela, as well as the majority of the countries of South America, is various on absolute heights, quantity of the dropping out rainfall and other conditions of the environment. It explains heterogeneity of a vegetable cover and richness of flora of the country. It is possible to allocate several floristic areas. On the northern coast flora typically Caribbean, with various trees from family bean, numerous cactuses, types of Caperia, Chiquinia and Ziziphus. The Venezuelan Andes are a continuation of the Andean region of the west of South America. Here vegetation. Mountain meadows. And the moderate woods of Colombia, in particular Aspalicia is characteristic, Geranium, Cirxylon, Cinchona, Miconia and Gentiana. Flora of the basin of Orinoco, various on a vegetable cover, is connected by the origin with more southern heights and rainforests. Here plantations of exotic types, for example a sugar cane and a coffee tree, are widespread. Many families are well presented, but also the palm trees which are allocated against the background of cereals are most noticeable bean. The considerable part of the southern regions of the country in flora is similar to Amazonia. Here such economically important types as a heavier Brazilian and a Castilla, a rubber-bearing and also rope palm tree. Piaçava. Bro. The most interesting floristic province is small on the area and occupies flat tops of the sandstone mountain Sarapagarima going along the southern border of the country from the Roraima Rayoni joined of Venezuela, Guyana and Brazil on the west to Mount Guida near the Casaquiar River connecting upper courses of Orinoco with upper courses of Unaga. It is a relic zone, so ancient that her next floristic communications are traced only with some heights of the south of Brazil, and more remote, with the Andean region, mountains of the Cuban Oriente area and the Western Africa. Here a lot of undermichni grows heather, a madder family, a pineapple family and cypress. The catchment basin of Orinoco occupies approximately the 4/5 territories of Venezuela. The Llanos area to the north from the river represents the extensive thickets of high cereals alternating savannas, palm groves and light forests. In many places Tuzlacovnik don't allow to grow by means of frequent floors. The woods occupying here significant areas belong to tropical listopadni type and are similar to the monsoonal woods of tropics of the Old World. They become closer to the Caribbean coast to the land and gradually gain the nature of prickly thickets with numerous cactuses and Shippasti bean. In the south and the east of the country along borders with Brazil and Guyana these Listobadni woods in many places are replaced with the typical rain Amazonian forest from high evergreen trees with closed bed curtains with numerous lianas and poorly expressed underbrush. Forests alternate savannas. The small areas of the similar rainforest are in the north of the country, generally at the southernmost tip of Lake Maracaibo. Slopes of the Venezuelan Andes are covered with the dense and almost impassable mosswood called also mountain rain or cloudy. It is the belt of a synconic tree, cinchona, which is often considered moderated on climate. Above border of growth of trees are treeless with domination of fancy types of espalicia, low shrubs and subauriculate plants. These mountain communities strike in numerous bright colors which give them similarity to huge alpine gardens. The excessive pasture led to the fact that natural vegetation in many places degraded to shrubby heathlands. The jaguar, puma, ocelot, shrubby dog, tyra, close to martens, otters, monkeys, svincavi, nutria, its cockvosti porcupine, tapir and bakers are found in Venezuela. Also deer and opossums meet. In many rivers crocodiles, alligators and turtles are ordinary. In the jungle boas, other snakes and lizards are plentifully presented. On lowlands the great number of cranes, herons, storks, ducks and other water game, and in mountains, birds of prey meets. After elimination of military dictatorship in 1958, in the country the multi-party system was installed. However, by 1968 two main political parties which alternately alternated in power, the Democratic Action, DA, and Social Christian Party, MINES, began to take the leading positions. During the subsequent period tendencies to formation of two-party political structure amplified. Though about 20 parties and the organizations participated in a general election, DD and MINES together collected more than 85% of votes. DD was created in September 1941 and considers itself Social Democratic Party, enters Socialist International. Representatives of DD held country's presidential posts in 1945, 1948, 1959, 1969, 1974, 1979, 1984, 1993. Formed in January 1946 Minds, the party of Christian Democrat orientation supporting revolution in the conditions of freedom, and also leaning on a network of working, agrarian, women's, youth, professional and other organizations. Minds headed the governments of the country in 1969, 1974 and 1979-1984. In reality, of difference between DD and Minds gradually smoothed out, and both parties passed to centrist positions. The acute social and economic and political crisis of the 1988 years, general discontent with corruption and apathy of voters led to considerable weakening of a position of both leading parties. New forces and the organizations began to come to political arena. First of all, it was the movement by socialism. Formed in 1971 as a result of split of the Communist Party. And stood on the positions close to Eurocommunism, condemned introduction of Soviet troops to Czechoslovakia in 1968. Operation Danube. And political system of the USSR. Supporting democratic socialism, and was the third most powerful political organization of the country in 1973-1993. In 1988 it collected more than 10% of votes on a general election. In 1992 a won governor's elections in 5 states, in 1995 in 4. However, in the 1990s it was pushed aside by other left group of populist character, Radical Business. KOSAR. Which also resulted from split of the Communist Party and leaned on labor union of metallurgists, the highly skilled workers occupied on front lines, technically the enterprises. In 1988 Radical Business for the first time won 3 seats in the National Congress. Parliament of the country. In 1989 won elections of the governor in the state of Bolivar, and in 1992 added to it a post of the mayor of the capital. In 1993 the candidate of party at presidential elections Andres Velasquez lagged behind representatives of DD and Minds on only several percent of votes. However, influence of party was unstable. Since the beginning of the 1990s in Venezuela there is a cardinal change of all former party system. Presidential elections of 1993 were won by the former head of the state from Party of Minds Rafael Caldera, who left the party and acting from the wide bloc of 17 centrist, left-wing and right-wing parties, National Convergence. By the leading force in the coalition was an but the new non-uniform ruling union held on not for long. At presidential elections of 1998 the victory was won by the charismatic military leader Hugo Chavez, who acted on behalf of the new organization, the Movement of the Fifth Republic. MREBER. Created in 1997. Program provisions of the DD had the general character. It promised carrying out the constitutional reform, clarification of the country from corruption and abuse of political elite, creation of democratic society of social justice, attraction of masses to government. Bolivarian committees, created by Chavez supporters, first of all, in Poo city quarters became a support of the DD. The DD headed the bloc the Patriotic Pole, which included various left-wing and populist parties, including NU and the Rodina Party, which broke away from Radical Business for All. Hugo Chavez won, having collected more than 55% of votes. However, his coalition couldn't win the majority of seats in the National Congress. The dominating positions in parliament still belonged to the DD traditional parties and minds. As the main rival of Chavez, the candidate of New Right Centrist Association, the Venezuela Project, Enrique Salas Reimer, who collected nearly 40% of votes, made a speech at elections of 1998. In the Constitution of Venezuela, accepted at the initiative of the President Hugo Chavez in 1999, it was for the first time recognized that 300,000 aboriginals of the country, Indians, have the rights for lands of the traditional accommodation and can participate in registration of the borders. In the old constitution, it was said only that aboriginals of the country are under protection of the state and have to join gradually in life of the nation. After adoption of the new constitution in 2000 in the country, new presidential and parliamentary elections in which won a victory ruling the DD were held. Hugo Chavez collected nearly 60% of votes, and his movement won 92 of 165 mandates in National Assembly. Other seats in Parliament were distributed as follows: DD -33, Minds -6, the Venezuela Project -6, and U -6, Radical Business -3, the Homeland for All -1. National Convergence, Rafael Caldera's supporters -1, other -17. On April 11, 2002, in the country there was an attempt of a coup. However, having got Massachusetts support at the population and in army, Hugo Chavez kept the power. On March 12, 2006, the unanimous decision of the National Assembly, Parliament of Venezuela accepted the changes in the state symbolics offered by the president of the country, Hugo Chavez. From now on a flag of Venezuela there will be an 8-star symbolizing accession of the most East Guayana area at the beginning of the 19th century. In 1817, the South American hero liberator Simon Bolivar suggested to use the 8-star. The National Assembly of Venezuela in August 2007 approved Chavez's amendments to the constitution. The number of re-elections of the president isn't limited. The Central Bank of Venezuela passes under control of the president of the country. New provinces under control of the central government are created. The working day decreases from 8 to 6 o'clock. Citizens of Venezuela acquire the right to vote on elections from 16 years, and also appears about transition of the country to creation of socialism. Amendments to the constitution were exposed on the referendum which took place on December 2, 2007. By his results, 50.7% which voted spoke against amendments, and Chavez recognized the defeat. On November 24, the president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, said that the Uniform Socialist Party of Venezuela, which leader he is in 2009, can raise anew a question of the constitutional amendments providing the unlimited term of presidential board. Chavez made this statement next day after SP won a convincing victory on regional elections in the country. On the referendum of 68% of citizens which took place in Venezuela on February 15, 2009 supported the constitutional amendments proposed by the President Hugo Chavez, which allow the president to be re-elected on the post unlimited number of times. Having got approval of most of voters, Chavez, who claimed more than once that he is ready to govern so much how many it will be wished by Lord and the people, closely started construction of the third stage of Bolivarian revolution. According to the leader of Venezuela, this stage will last till 2019 and will be directed to deepening of socialist revolution and also continuation of fight against poverty, corruption and crime. The plan for elimination of illiteracy takes the important place in the program of the Venezuelan leader. Chavez considered that the previous two stages of Bolivarian revolution, the first from 1999 to 2006, the second from 2007 to 2009, are already successfully complete. The revolution victory, finding of independence of the country and the beginning of creation of socialism became their main outcome. The president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, approved the list of references for school students with which they without fail will have to get acquainted. These are monographs by the president of the country, the Manifesto of the Communist Party, of Karl Marx, Che Guevara's works and other works which will help them to get rid of capitalist thinking and also to strengthen collective consciousness, and it is more best to understand ideals and values, necessary for a construction of the socialist homeland. The president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, relied on the anti-American rhetoric, popular in the country, and carried out internal, including economic, policy according to a socialist course. A tall visibility of the anti-American position in the USA, as regarding export operations. The main consumer of the Venezuelan hydrocarbons. And import. The main supplier of industrial and agricultural output. Remains the main trade partner of Venezuela. Falling of unemployment rate was reached by Chavez due to active expansion of public sector. In 2007-2008 in the country, not only the oil industry, but also ferrous metallurgy, the cement industry and mobile communication were nationalized. Estates of the company which appeared in hands put a task not increase in efficiency, but expansion of employment on the Soviet sample. Bolivarian Revolution, of Chavez, among other things, includes fight against inflation as supporters of socialist methods understand her. Since 2003 in the country, the prices of 400 types of goods, including food, for fight against inflation and protection of the poor, centrally are established. The periodic deficiency of products in the state with tropical agriculture and sharp increase in prices became their result. So, for example, there is a restriction for a holiday of milk and a constant shortage of eggs. Countrywide in the last decade inflation was 21% a year, however food in the black market rose in price for 50% annually. The government of Venezuela actively tries to redistribute income from the oil and gas sector on the social purposes, but practically doesn't use them for development of national economy, her diversification and new investments in the oil and gas sphere. At the same time, it is necessary to remember that the efficiency of production due to production of hydrocarbons constantly decreases and consequently costs grow, profitability decreases and the level of income of the country falls. What in turn, at the growing social expenses and impressive internal and external public debt, can lead to a default as a result of rather sensitive collapse in prices for oil. Considering problematical character of external loans for Venezuela in connection with her economic policy, the only way to protect the country from such scenario of succession of events, except her development, increase in a role of OPEC, which participant is also Venezuela, in pricing is in this regard, it is possible to refer increase in the role of OPEC in the state of affairs in the oil market to Hugo Chávez's achievements. By the time of his election, the discipline in OPEC began to suffer. Some states, including Venezuela, regularly broke the production quotas that led to a collapse in prices. In 2000, Chavez organized the Summit of Heads of States of Alliance. The first in 25 years and the second in the history of the organization. Actions of OPEC began to affect the market again that allowed Alliance to play on price increase. And though the OPEC was one of many factors which led to price increase within the first decade of the 21st century, the role of Alliance was very noticeable. However, this policy led to the conflict between Chavez and the National Oil Company, PDVSA. For decades of PDVSA got used not to carry out quotas, and to extract as much as possible oil to maximize the income. The staff of PDVSA in 2002 staged a strike, having completely stopped oil production in the country. That removed from the market 3 million barrels a day, having led to sharp jump in prices. The government dismissed more than 19,000 employees of the company, having replaced with their supporters Chavez, but production couldn't recover completely during the whole next year. Restrictions for the foreign capital have an adverse effect on a condition of the basic for the country of the oil and gas sector. The matter is that PDVSA has to invest not less than $3 billion annually to support production on old fields, on some of which production will decrease differently by 25% a year. But the problem is that the company provides about a half of revenues of the government and 80% of export revenue of the country. At note for the Venezuelan economy and the Russian companies, an exception is the agreement reached in 2009 on permission to the Russian companies of development of gas fields and construction of gas pipelines in Venezuela. Since March 5, 2013, after Hugo Chávez's death, duties of the President of Venezuela were fulfilled by Nicolas Maduro, whom Chávez called the successor. New elections took place on April 14, 2013. As Maduro's rival at them, Enrique Capriles Radonsky, struggling on last elections with Chávez, acted. Nicolas Maduro was elected the President of Venezuela. On May 20, 2018, Nicolas Maduro on elections. All leaders of opposition were discharged of an opportunity to stand. Therefore, these elections weren't recognized as the international community, except for Russia, China, and was re-elected on a post of the head of Venezuela for 2019-2025, having collected 6.2 million votes. On January 10, 2019, Maduro's inauguration was held. In 2013, national economy was in a difficult situation and held generally the account of the high world prices for oil, the main export goods of the republic. On the eve of coming to power of Maduro, the beginning of 2013, the public debt of Venezuela made 70% of GDP, and budget deficit minus 13%. Though following the results of 2013, GDP of the country grew by 1.6%, but inflation remained very high, minus 56.3%. Maduro, having received for half a year emergency powers from Parliament, announced economic approach, and in particular, entered a 30% ceiling on profit for the private companies. In the country there was a deficiency of the main goods, such as sugar, vegetable oil and toilet paper. At the same time, in the government say that corruption, sabotage and speculation, and also the economic war, which is conducted against the country, is the reason of problems. The government began to carry out the program of fight against speculation, in particular the retail chain stores of Dhaka, for refusal to lower the prices, which for some goods exceeded purchasing for 100% at admissible norm of 30%, were nationalized on November 26. After confiscation of goods, all management of retail chain stores was arrested. In 2014, national economy endured the next blow. Sharp falling of the world prices for oil. As a result, revenues of the government from export of oil were reduced by a third in comparison with previous year, a comment 1. The central bank tried to cover budget deficit due to issue, therefore inflation for September 2015 reached, by estimates, at least 200% per annum. According to official figures, minus 140%. In attempt to constrain inflation, the government introduced a complex system of currency exchange, therefore dollar official rate more than by 100 times exceeded market. Following Chavism ideology, Maduro's government administratively limited food prices that resulted in total deficiency of the main food. In January 2016, the President Maduro appointed the Minister of Economics of Luis Salas, the sociologist of the left political convictions. As well as other members of the government of Maduro, Salas considers the main reason for difficulties the economic war launched by the countries of the West minus Venezuela. In 2016, according to the International Monetary Fund and other organizations, fall of GDP was 18%, inflation reached 550%, unemployment minus 21%. Budget deficit minus 17% of GDP, and the external debt exceeded $130 billion. The country is on the verge of a default. 93% of the population of the country complain of malnutrition. The expected annual rate of inflation is 100%. Dollar exchange rate in the black market exceeds an official rate by 900 times. According to the statement of the International Monetary Fund, the rate of inflation in Venezuela will reach 4% at the end of 2018. There is an opinion that structural and political factors, among which there are a big dependence on import, decrease in the world prices for oil, and state control over production and distribution of food, are the main reasons of an economic crisis. Since April 15, 2013, protest actions of opposition, as a result of which at least 7 people died, began. The leader of opposition, Enrique Capriles, said the protester that so far it is necessary to stop protests in such form, and that he agrees with results of elections. On March 1 there took place new demonstrations, both Nicolas Maduro's supporters and oppositionists, the victims weren't. At the beginning of February 2014 in Venezuela, generally in the capital and the large cities, demonstrations and protest actions of the leader of the country and Maduro-minding policy began. Not only the middle class, which always is negatively incited against such policy, but also poor segments of the population, until then favorably treating populist policy of Chavism, took part in them. From the very beginning of protests, the president of the country of Maduro banned any street demonstrations and called protesters by fascist gangs. On February 12, skirmishes between opponents of the President Maduro, on the one hand, both his supporters and police, with another, led to death of 3 people. During the protests preceding the 6th day, more than 40 people were wounded. On February 17 in Caracas, the opposition, headed by the leader Leopoldo Lopez, on whom the warrant for the arrest, but which was going to go at the head of a column, was already issued, held on streets a march in white clothes and handed to An Maduro's government the manifesto with the requirements, main among which, to release arrested and to stop prosecution of opposition. By the end of February, in protests and disorders, more than 50 people died. The situation so became complicated that even oppositional chapters of a number of the districts of Caracas were forced to appeal to the supporters to refuse such form of protests. On May 2, 2016, representatives of opposition transferred to the authorities the petition about holding a referendum on discharge of the President Maduro from the power. The petition was signed by 1.85 million people, that it is much higher than 1% of the total number of the registered voters, universal suffrage, necessary for carrying out a comment to. On June 10, 2016, the National Electoral Council of Venezuela decided that after the carried out inspection personal confirmation 1.3 million signatures, or more than 70% of the votes given for a referendum, is required. On June 11, the President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, declared that the referendum on his resignation in 2016 won't take place as, according to him, on the organization of a referendum there is no time. On May 20, 2018, early presidential elections took place. The opposition boycotted elections, having called the last a juggling. The victory on elections was won by the current president, Nicolas Maduro. Elections caused a protest from the majority of the countries of the West and also Latin America. 14 countries, including Argentina, Brazil and Canada, recalled the ambassadors from Caracas in protest at results of elections. For the same reason, the USA inflicted additional economic sanctions on Venezuela. The United States President Donald Trump called for carrying out new elections and the termination of repressions in Venezuela. The President of Russia 5. Putin congratulated An Maduro on re-election and wished him success in the solution of social and economic problems of the country. Except Russia, results of elections were recognized also by El Salvador, Cuba and China. In January 2019, the prolonged political crisis sharply escalated. The Speaker of National Assembly Juan Guaido, against the background of the Massachusetts meetings of a protest which began after Nicolas Maduro's inauguration for the second presidential term, proclaimed himself the acting president. Nicolas Maduro said that he will remain on the post before the expiration of the term put to him in 2025. The escalated opposition in Venezuela caused polarization of the international community. Venezuela broke off diplomatic relations with Colombia. The population of Venezuela -28.1 million people. Annual gain -1.5%. Birth rate -20 for 1,000. Fertility -2.5 births only women, infantile mortality -21 for 1,000. Mortality -5 for 1,000. Average life expectancy -70.84 years at men, 77. 87 years at women. Contamination, a virus of an immunodeficiency. HIV -0.7%. Assessment of 2001. Ethno-racial structure. Metis is -67%, Europeans, Spaniards, Italians, Portuguese, Germans, the French. -21%, Africans -10%, Indians -2%. Literacy -95%, 2005-2008. Urban population -93%, in 2008. Aggravation of an economic crisis, growth of political tension and level of violence in 2016-2018 led to the sharp growth of emigration, which is on control at the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. X. Since 2016, on the first half of 2018, the country left, by different estimates, from 1.6 to 2.3 million people, from whom 90% arrived in various countries of South America. Besides, hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans are in other countries illegally. According to X, illegal refugees can become the victims of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, discrimination and xenophobia. Because of the scale, migration crisis in Venezuela is considered the largest for all history of South America. Most of the population of Venezuela carry themselves to the Roman Catholic Church, within which the local population has Maria Leones as cult, which isn't recognized by Catholic Church. A relationship between the President Hugo Chavez and Catholic Church was quite intense. There was a risk of break in relations between Venezuela and Vatican. In one of the performances, Hugo Chavez told about Catholic priests. All of them still think that all of them are the dominating force in the state. Forget about it, cave inhabitants. Also, since 2006, the Reformed Catholic Church of Venezuela works. Her priests are the clergymen forbidden in service by Catholic bishops for various initial violations. Soon the former Lutheran pastor Enrique Albanrose also joined them. The alleged support of new church by Hugo Chavez given her as opposed to Catholic became the main reason for world publicity. The church doesn't demand obligatory celibacy from the clergymen, doesn't consider a sin homosexuality, allows a divorce. The only obligatory rule is full support of the socialist project of the President Chavez. Albanrose didn't refuse also Martin Luther's honoring, and church services gained some Protestant lines. The church, for summer of 2008, consists of 5 arrivals in the province of Zulia. Most of Protestants of the country, Pentecostals. The largest Pentecostal denomination is the Venezuelan Assemblies of God, -410,000 believers. The Pentecostal movement is also represented by the Giant Pentecostal Church, Church of the Quadrilateral Gospel, the Church of God, Universal Church of the God's Kingdom, etc. Adventists total in the ranks 197,000 believers. The National Baptist Convention unites 550 churches and 45,000 believers. The Plymouth Brothers -23,000, Lutherans -7,000, Church of the Nazarene -5,000 followers. Venezuela in the administrative relation is divided on 23 states. Amazonas and Sodigi Apure, Aragua, Barines, Bolivar, Carico, Delta Amacuro, Zulia, Carabobo, Caquides, Lara, Merida, Miranda, Monagas, Nueva Esparta, Portuguesa, Sucre, Taquera, Trujillo, Falcon, Yaraqui. 1. The Federal District, the district of the capital of Caracas. Federal possession. Since August 3, 2011, Miranda probably also became the territory. Islands in the Caribbean Sea. The states of Venezuela are grouped to 9 regions established by the presidential decree. The president of Venezuela is elected by a simple majority vote during the direct national vote and is the head of state and the governments. The term of presidential power is -6 years. The president can be re-elected unlimited number of times. The president appoints the vice president, makes decisions on structure and the structure of the government and appoints his dicks with the consent of parliament. The president has rights of a legislative initiative and can offer changes in the existing legislation, however his offers can be rejected by simple parliamentary majority. The unicameral parliament, National Assembly of Venezuela, consists of 165 deputies. 162 deputies are elected on a proportional and list system in multi-mandatory districts, including 97 personally and 65 according to party lists. The remaining 3 places are reserved for representatives of indigenous people of Venezuela. The term of deputy power is -5 years. Deputies can be elected at most for 3 terms. The Supreme Judicial Authority, the Supreme Tribunal of Justice and Tribunal Supremo de Justicia. His magistrates are elected by Parliament for one 12-year term. In parliamentary elections in December 2015, the victory was won by the oppositional coalition the Round Table of Democratic Unity, which received 56.2% of votes and 109 of 164 seats in parliament. The pro-presidential left coalition, the Big Patriotic Poll, collected 40.9% of votes and will have 55 places. The parties represented in parliament: the Uniform Socialist Party of Venezuela, the left-wing pro-government party, 52 deputies. In the bloc on elections performed with SP, the Communist Party of Venezuela, which received 2 seats in the National Assembly, and some other the left-wing parties. The People's Electoral Movement, the Fatherland for All, for Social Democracy, which were left without representation. Round Table of Democratic Unity. Mesa de la Unidad Democrática, in opposition. 109 deputies. Includes several tens of various parties and organizations, practically all political range, from the far right to extremely left, including Conservative Party, Venezuela Project, Christian Democratic Parties, National Convergence, and Minds, centrist parties, For Justice, and National Will, Social Democratic Parties, Modern Times, Democratic Action, the Movement by Socialism, Alliance of the Fearless People, and Progressive Vanguard, Socialist, Radical Business, and HIstory, Red Banner. Crime. Rise in crime is one of the main threats to the Venezuelan society. In 2015 in the country, nearly 28,000 people, and 90 murders on each 100,000 of the population were killed. On this indicator, Venezuela advances the majority of the countries of Latin America. 90% of murders remain unsolved. Since 2005, the government stopped publishing full statistics on crime. Venezuela took active part in work of the Union and the Organization of American States, OAS, which member she is. But on April 27, 2019, Venezuela left OAG. Also, National Assembly cancelled his decision and appointed the representative of Venezuela in OAG, who will guarantee membership continuation. She was also among the country's founders of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, created in 1960. Venezuela is included into the Latin American Association of Integration and together with Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador and Peru into the Andean Pact. Also, Venezuela has a noticeable impact on other Caribbean countries through preferential supply of oil within the Petrocaribe program existing since 2005. At U. Chavez, Venezuela was included into alliance of the Latin American countries of ALBA. In the period of the high prices of oil, in the 1970th and the beginning of the 1980th years, Venezuela adhered to very rigid and independent course in foreign policy. Having nationalized the oil industry, the country began to broaden the sphere of the influence, especially in the Caribbean region. She possessed the leading role in the Contadora group of the Latin American states created for the purpose of assistance to peaceful settlement of crisis in Central America. What the USA actively opposed. Together with other countries of the region, Venezuela actively participated in development of collective measures on overcoming crisis of non-payments, and urged the international organizations to draw close attention to economic problems of the countries of the Third World. Venezuela long since made a claim for the part of the territory of Guyana located to the west from the Essequibo River and making about 3/4 of the area of Guyana, and also has border disputes with Colombia and the Netherlands Antilles. The dispute with Colombia on ownership of the Gulf of Venezuela lasting 30 years escalated in the late 80s, the beginning of the 1998 years, because during their pathways of underground transportations of drugs and also in connection with opening of new oil fields in this area. In 1989, the Union directed the intermediary to help Venezuela and Guyana to resolve a controversial issue of the region of Essequibo. After a number of incidents on border, both countries signed the agreement on creation of Bilateral Control Commission in 1997. The middle of the 1990th years was noted by border conflicts with Brazil because of illicit transportation through border of weapons and drugs, and also because of attacks of the Brazilian gold diggers on Indians of the tribe living in the territory of Venezuela. In August 2015, the diplomatic conflict between Venezuela and Colombia, owing to the measures for fight against the militarized groups and smugglers accepted by Venezuela, which included Massachusetts deportations of the Colombians living in the Venezuelan territory and closure of border, erupted. In April 2017, Venezuela declared an exit from OPEC. Process of an exit of the country of this association will take about 2 years. On February 13, 2018, Venezuela was temporarily disfranchised in the Union because of the collected debts. At the end of the 19th century, Venezuela announced the claims for the territory of the British Guiana to the west of the Essequibo River, after their deposits of gold and diamonds were found. The International Arbitration Tribunal in 1899 solved a dispute in favor of Britain. Only the small site in the northwest of the British Guiana was transferred to Venezuela. With 1962, 4 years prior to obtaining by Guyana independence of Great Britain, Venezuela began to demand the territory to the west of the Essequibo River again, about 160,000 km. It is nearly 3/4 of all territory of Guyana. These claims repeated all presidents of Venezuela, including Hugo Chavez. Venezuela has diplomatic relations with the Russian Federation. Were established with the USSR on March 14, 1945, are interrupted on June 13, 1952 and restored on April 16, 1970.
In November 2008, during the visit of the President of Russia Dmitry Medvedev to Venezuela, the intergovernmental agreement setting a visa-free regime of trips of citizens of Russia and Venezuela to each other for a period of up to 90 days was signed.
The agreement came into force on March 6, 2009. On September 10, 2009, the President of Venezuela Hugo Chavez, being on an official visit in Moscow, announced the decision of Venezuela to recognize South Ossetia and Abkhazia as the independent states.
On September 15, 2009, in SOCOM, the official note of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Venezuela about recognition of independence of the Republic of Abkhazia was handed to delegation of Abkhazia, which is in this country on an official visit.
Venezuela became the third, after Russia and Nicaragua, the country which recognized independence of two Caucasian republics. In March 2010, Venezuela was visited by the Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. Venezuela, the largest operator of the Russian arms and military equipment in Latin America. For 2019, the sum of contracts is estimated at $11 billion. Among other, Venezuela bought mobile air defense systems of average range, Siege Bokask. And big range, anti-2500, Su-MQ fighters, helicopters Mi-35M, the T-72, BMI-3 and TRO-80 tanks, and also 100,000 AK-103 submachine guns.
At Hugo Chavez contacts with the People's Republic of China, which from 1998 years needs deliveries of energy carriers and from the exporter of oil became more active, I turned into her large importer.
Beijing seeks to diversify sources of deliveries, most of which part is the share of the countries of the Middle East. Hugo Chavez repeatedly paid to China official visits.
In June 2010, China granted to Venezuela the loan for $20 billion for 10 years in exchange for supply of hydrocarbons from 200,000 to 300,000 barrels a day.
Venezuela, the high-growth petro-exporting state. The economy of Venezuela is based on oil production, which yields 95% of export revenues, more than 50% of revenues of the state budget, and about 30% of DDD. DDD of Venezuela in 2009, $344 billion. The 35th place in the world. DDD per capita -$12.8 thousand. Unemployment -7.9%. In 2009. A population share below the poverty line -37.9%. At the end of 2005. Growth of consumer prices in 2010, 29.8%. The industry. A share in DDD -35% in 2010. Production of building materials, the food industry, the textile industry.
Extraction of iron ore, smelting of steel and aluminum.
Assembly of cars. By 2013, annual inflation reached 54%. In November 2013, according to the order of the President Nicolas Maduro, owners and the staff of networks selling household goods were arrested. by means of army and police goods were sold out at the price of 10% from usual cost. In a number of places, persons interested to receive goods at reduced price, the police didn't manage to cope with inhabitants and shops were plundered. Since May 1, 2021, the minimum wage makes card Vs $2.48 in a month. Venezuela possesses the world's largest proved oil reserves. For the beginning of 2017, stocks made 47.6 billion tons.
From them, 87.8% are presented in the form of super heavy and bituminous oil. 92.9% of oil raw materials lie within the pool of Oriental.
The most important fields of the pool are Cerro Negro, 9.0 billion t, and Zuata Principal, 8.6 billion t. Others, the first in volume fields of Venezuela of stocks are Tijuana Lago, 379 million tons, Block 7 Chuta, 282 million tons, Boscan, 213 million tons, Bachaquero Lago, 213 million tons, Santa Barbara, 186 million tons, Mulata, 232 million tons, and Alfurial, 128 million tons. Agriculture share in DDD of Venezuela -4%. 13% of labor are employed in the industry, anyway, about a quarter of the territory of the country is used.
A cultivated corn, a sorghum, a sugar cane, rice, bananas, vegetables, coffee.
Beef, pork, milk, eggs are produced. Fishery is developed. The most fertile farmlands of Venezuela are located around the Lake Valencia, in intermountain valleys of the Andes and in the south of the basin of Lake Maracaibo. Extensive areas of steppes and savannas in the central part of the country long time were used mainly for cattle breeding. However, after construction of large irrigating constructions began to grow up rice, corn and other cultures here. The main export cultures of Venezuela are coffee and cocoa. Corn, rice and beans are grown up only for internal consumption. The most part of food is imported. Agriculture covers own needs of the country only on a third. In 2005, USA alone exported to Venezuela of products of agriculture for $347 million. In the early 90s, only about 4% of national income fell to the share of the agrarian sector. Such ratio makes a wrong impression of advanced economy. Before oil was discovered, the main articles of the Venezuelan export made coffee, cocoa, the cattle, skins and so forth. However, by 1950, after for many years attention wasn't paid to agriculture at all, more than a third of foodstuff had to be imported.
Since the beginning of the 1950s, agricultural production considerably grew to the middle of the 1970s years. In the range from 1961 to 1975, production of food almost doubled, though the share of agricultural workers was reduced from 1/3 to 1/2 of total occupied in economy of Venezuela.
It allowed to reduce import to 7% of necessary volume of foodstuff.
Later growth of agricultural production slowed down, having been 24% in 12 years since 1975 on 1987, whereas the population continued to increase quickly.
As a result, the quantity of products per capita dropped by 14%, and in 1987 Venezuela was forced to import nearly a third of necessary food. The foundation of modern manufacturing industry was laid in the 1950th years, and since then production in this sector began to increase quickly. Nevertheless, in the early 90s only about 15% of economically active population were engaged in it, and 22% of DDD fell to her share. And the fifth part of this quantity was made by oil products. Initially, primary branches of manufacturing industry were oil refinery and sugar, and also assembly of cars from import parts and production of textiles, cement, car tires and cans, cigarettes, beer, washed, pharmaceutical goods and glass products. In the 1960th years, Venezuela began to develop the heavy industry.
A powerful steel smelting industry was created, and aluminum production and fertilizers began.
Later, in the 1970th years, a considerable part of sharply increased income from export of oil invested in the heavy industry. Between 1970 and 1980, production of steel almost doubled, and production of nitrogen fertilizers and smelting of aluminum grew by 15 times. In 1979, aluminum came out on top in the Venezuelan export, after oil products, having left behind iron ore. Development of the heavy industry in the country is carried out generally at the initiative of the government. The largest project was development of key branches of metallurgy around the Venezuelan Guayana, on the Orinoco rivers and Caroni.
Mineral richness of the area, considerable deposits of iron ore and bow, and also rich hydroenergy resources and an outlet to the sea.
Down the river Orinoco, sea vessels can rise.
Allowed government corporation and private foreign firms to construct the enterprises for production of steel and aluminum here.
Besides, the government takes also measures for development of the petrochemical industry. The large petrochemical complex is constructed in the city of Moron, to the north from Valencia, one more, on east coast of Lake Maracaibo. Except oil. Its share in export in 2017, 80%. Venezuela exports bow, aluminum, coffee, coal, nickel, emeralds, bananas, flowers. Export from Venezuela, $27.8 billion in 2017. Code generally to the USA -$11.6 billion, 42%. And also to China -$6. $42 billion. 23%. And India -$5.25 billion. 19%. Venezuela imports $9.1 billion in 2017. Generally industrial output, including oil products, food and consumer goods. The main supplier of import to Venezuela, the USA 38% and also China 18%, Mexico 12%, Brazil 5.2% and Colombia 3.5%. External debt of Venezuela -$43.4 billion. At the end of 2009. The President Hugo Chavez pursued policy on strengthening of the state control of economy. In 2007 he nationalized the enterprises of oil, communication and power sectors. In 2008 I nationalized the enterprises producing steel and cement. In July 2008 Chavez issued the decree on further strengthening of subordination of economy within his plan of socialism of the 21st century. Sharp drop in oil prices in 2014-2016 against the background of wrong policy of socialist presidents Chavez and Maduro, led to an acute economic, social and political crisis. As the most part of food is imported, the country appeared on the verge of hunger. Observers note the unprecedented scale of crisis, similar to which Latin America didn't see for all the modern history. There are fears that long crisis in Venezuela can threaten stability of all Latin American countries.
National Armed Forces of Venezuela total about 129,000 servicemen and are subdivided on
Ground Forces minus 64,000. The Navy's minus 18,000. Including Marines minus 8,000. The Air Force minus 12,000. National Guard minus 36,000. The largest astronomical observatory in Venezuela is the National Astronomical Observatory Glajano del Chato. Holidays: January 1 New Year of Año Nuevo. May 1 Labor Day of Dia del Trabajador. June 24 Fight at Carabobo Batalla de Carabobo. July 5 Independence Day of Dia de la Independencia. July 24 Birthday of Simon Bolivar of Natalicio del Libertador Simon Bolivar. October 12 Day of the Nation of Dia de la Raza. December 25 Navidad Christmas. The culture of Venezuela has the Spanish and Indian roots besides. From the middle of the 20th century some influence of the United States affects. The role of the Afro-Caribbean population in formation of national culture is extremely small. The ethnotype of Venezuela is considered the inhabitant of plains, llanos, reminding the Argentina gaucho. Folklore, their songs, dances and legends enjoy wide popularity. Favorite genre of folklore, representing the whole suite from dances, songs and tool plays. National tools, a maraca. The gragos made of the dried up pumpkin. A small harp and a 4-string guitar participate in music. From other national dances by popularity enjoy tono glajinero, a melody of plains. Kind of the Creole waltz. To a merengue, genre of Afro-American folklore, general for all Antilles area. And Venezuelan Argentina tango. The national song of Venezuela is presented by genres of a copla, couplet, and a bullfight, developed on the basis of the Spanish Romance. A number of the cultural organizations and institutions, such as Caracas Theatre, Ateneo, conduct active promotion of national art and folk music.
Many works of folk musical art are included in the repertoire of chorus, or Fian Lamas, at the head of which long time there was a composer Vicente Emilio of Soho.
1887-1974. Soho was also a conductor of National Symphonic Orchestra of Caracas. The Institute of Studying of Folklore plays a role of information center at the organization of regional festivals of folk art in Caracas. Many of these festivals are held in days of religious holidays. Formation of the Venezuelan literature is connected with Simon Rodriguez, Andrés Bello and Simon Bolivar's names. The Romanticism in national literature is represented by the prose writer Fermin Thoreau, 1807-1865, and the poet Juan Antonio Pérez Bonald, 1846-1892. Manuel Vicente Romero Garcia, 1865–1917. The author of the novel Piña, 1890. Became the initiator of realism. The aesthetics of Hispano-Comiconste modernism was developed by prose writers Manuel Diaz Rodriguez, 1868–1927, and Rufino Blanco Fombona, 1974–1944. Also Teresa de la Parra, 1891–1936. One of the most popular writers of Latin America is among the famous writers. The ex-president Romulo Gallegos, 1884–1969. His works are devoted to relationship of the person and the nature, was the greatest Venezuelan writer of the 20th century. His novel, Dona Barbara, won the international recognition. Mariano Pican Salas, 1901–1965. The master of art prose, was also famous Latin American sociologist. From the Venezuelan poets of 20th century, Andrés Eloy Blanco is considered the largest, 1897–1955. Miguel Otero Silva, 1908–1985. The author of a number of novels of social subject and also the remarkable historical novel, Lope de Aguirre, Svoboda's Prince, 1979. Are among the most considerable modern prose writers. And Arturo Asler Pietri, 1906–2001. Also outstanding critic and author of short stories. His historical novel about an era of fight for independence of Venezuela, Scarlet Spear, is renowned. 1931. Juan Pedro Lopez, 1724–1787. The author of church frescoes, was the largest Venezuelan artist of a colonial era. In the 19th century, the Tovar I Tovar, 1828–1902, which imprinted episodes of the War of Independence from the Spanish crown, is allocated to Martín. Other artist romantic of the 19th century, Arturo Michelena, 1873–1898. Wrote large works on religious and secular plots. From artists of 20th century, Tito Salas is most known, 1889–1974. Among younger generation of artists, Osvaldo Viges is considered one of the most gifted. Alejandro Colin and Francisco Narvaez as sculptors. River of 1908. Enjoyed popularity. Visual Arts Center of Venezuela is the Museum of Fine Arts in Caracas. Venezuela was one of the poorest Spanish colonies, therefore there are no outstanding monuments of colonial architecture here. Not numerous examples of constructions of this period can be found in the capital and also in the old cities of Merida and Valencia. From the beginning of an oil boom, the set of creations of modern architects appeared. This new source of wealth stimulated rough construction, especially in Caracas. The most popular sport is the baseball. In honor of Venezuela, the asteroid 9357. Venezuela is called. On August 19, 2007, the President Chavez, acting in the telecast, I suggested to change the time zone of Venezuela. The Minister of Science and Technology of Venezuela, Hector Navarro, said after that the transition to modern times will be carried out in the middle of September 2007, it will move for the half an hour ahead from the current time. From UTS-4 on UTS-4. 30. Will bring into accord the beginning of work and study of Venezuelans with light day and will well affect their health and health. The time zone of UTS-4, 30 was already used in Venezuela from 1912 to 1964. The time conversion plan for September 24, 2007 was postponed because of bureaucratic formalities with the international organizations.
The modern times of time conversion announced January 2008.
On November 26, 2007 the decree of the President of Venezuela on transition to the new time zone since December 9, 2007 was issued.
The main motive of Chavez's change of the time zone of the country in 2007 call an anti-Americanism that is confirmed by his statements about need to refuse time imposed by the American imperialism.
Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.